Yeah, I'll just.
So you can take a picture of it.
Is this it?
This is it.
Oh, sweet, thank you.
Oh,
Okay, we have like 2 laps to do. We had like the photographers come in.
I know, I saw you guys come in for the camera.
Yeah, he was like taking her, he made me like pose and stuff. I was like, make her move her Starbucks stripes. Yeah.
Okay, so this also,
Good, you guys can get on there. I've been on there for 2 years.
It's so annoying.
oh, I've seen you,
I
yeah.
had my hair
exactly.
down.
Yeah,
Think
Lincoln,
about
you're
that.
on
It made me move my hair because I was like this. So he's like, keep your hair behind. I was like holding the slides up and he like got down below me.
Yeah, they're weird.
Stop. He like only wanted our group. I think it's because
I never emailed back the photographer, like they always say, who wants to have the photographer come? And I'm like, no.
it's 8 in the morning. Like we're not really. So it was Friday. Everybody's in sweatpants and stuff, and then they just wanted our
Okay.
group because he's the only boy. Jared's the only boy in the class.
Okay, so glycogenesis. The second one is glycogenolysis. So this is an essay question. So instead of genesis, it's genolysis. And so you remember that lysis is to break apart, like hydrolysis, right? And so this is actually catabolic metabolism of glucose. And so this is where, this is during, not famine, but this is during, we'll put famine. You know, I don't want to use famine because I want to use the famine for the next one. What do I want to say? Fasting, that's what I want to say. Okay, so fasting. So this is where glycogen is broken down and released by liver cells and muscle cells. The intestinal cells have to pick up glucose and then transport it across their surface of the small intestine, and then they have to release it into the blood. And then the kidney cells, when we talk about the kidney, we'll talk about the reabsorption of glucose, because one of the characteristics of diabetes is that you get sugar in the urine. And so we have to reabsorb the sugar, and if we have too much sugar, we can't reabsorb it, okay? So this is where glycogen is broken down and released. And released. So this would be like if you haven't eaten for hours, it could be like right after. So if you're don't eat all night long and you don't eat breakfast, you're going to go into glycogenolysis. You're going to start to break down the glycogen reserves. Okay. So the third one is glyconeogenesis. So what do you think neo means? New, right? And so this is actually producing glycogen or pyruvate, but just generally we'll just talk about glycogen, this from a non-carbohydrate source. So this is the production of glycogen, or glucose from a non-carbohydrate source. Okay. So this would be after all of the glycogen reserves have been depleted. And so this could include protein and lipids. So lipids are generally actually used first. I should have put them first. Lipids are used first, and they can be converted in the liver and used to produce ATP. And then proteins are also broken down in the liver to use to produce ATP. So glyconeogenesis might be a little bit liver intensive. So sometimes, I don't know if you read the literature on how to lose fat, one of the things that they say is that your liver has to be really healthy in order to do that. And the reason why your liver has to be healthy is that it's the liver that is breaking down the lipids. And so if your liver cannot break down the lipids, then more lipids get stored, right? And so you have to have a healthy liver. So sometimes they talk about liver cleanses and how good that is to reduce the toxins, like to reduce caffeine and alcohol and other liver toxins in order to lose weight. Okay. Okay, so if we go back to my digestive system. So when we break down, or when we absorb glucose, I mentioned this before, glucose has a phosphate group attached to it, and then that phosphate group can be removed to produce glycogen. So notice that these glucose are monosaccharides, and the glycogen is just a polysaccharide. So it's just a way to store, okay? Sometimes they call that glyconeogenesis. They call it, they call this glucose sparing. So if you're going to use proteins and lipids to produce energy, then you're going to spare the glucose. Okay, so if the glucose is at low levels, that might be important because your nervous system also needs glucose. Okay. And this is during famine. So this would be like if you don't eat for a week, then you're going to start using your proteins for energy. And that could be a bad thing because it's going to take the muscle proteins first. And so you're going to start to lose muscle mass, which is a bad thing if you're trying to lose weight, because muscle is one of the most metabolically active tissues. And so it actually produces energy, a lot of energy, and uses a lot of energy. Okay.
If you're still taking in like liquids such as water, is it still considered fasting?
Yes. Yep. You have to have water. You wouldn't survive a week without water.
Well,
but yeah.
How long can you go without water? 3 days.
3 days.
Yeah. Probably depends upon the environment too. Like if you're out in the desert, probably a lot less because you're losing it. Okay. So when we look at the other types of molecules, we can talk about the necessity for lipids. Okay. So one reason we need lipids is that this stores energy. So this is the storage of energy. Okay. Also, it's insulation. So this is subcutaneous. So we're going to talk about metabolism, and if you have body fat, you tend to have less energy lost to the environment, right? So if you think about mammals that live in cold waters, they have lots of fat to insulate them, right? Subcutaneous. And then also cushioning, and so this tends to be visceral fat. So not only do you have fat underneath your skin, but you have it around your organs. And what you're going to talk about, the kidney sits way back in the back of the body cavity, kind of underneath the peritoneum and the peritoneal membrane. And it has to be cushioned with lipids because the lipids actually also hold it in place. And so when people get super skinny and they get rid of that fat, their kidney will actually drop. And so we have to have some fat around some of the organs in order to also hold them in place. We even have fat around our heart, right? Too much fat is a bad thing because that seems to be associated with cardiovascular diseases. Okay. So those are two different types of fat. Okay, so when we look at these are the triglycerides. Right? So these would be like fats and oils. So the fat that's found in whole milk, for example, which you make butter, the fat that would be found in cheese, right? And then the oils are plant-derived, and so they would be like olive oil, coconut oil is a plant-derived one. Okay. Okay. We also have phospholipids, or the need to produce phospholipids. And does anybody know where phospholipids are found? Cell membrane. Right? So these make up the plasma membrane of the cell. We also have steroids. So steroids are also lipids. And one steroid that is actually really important because it's a precursor to the production of hormones would be cholesterol. So cholesterol is a steroid that we have to have it, right, in our bodies. We can make it. It's not essential, but it's good to have it in your diet. And they actually don't think, we talked about in the circulatory system, and you'll learn more about it. But in the circulatory system, remember, cholesterol is transported with lipoproteins, right? And having LDL versus high DL can affect your risk for atherosclerosis or blocked vessels, okay? So cholesterol, it gets converted into testosterone and estrogen. And also it gets converted into vitamin D. And vitamin D is necessary for calcium absorption. And so if you lack vitamin D, then your bones will not have enough calcium in them. So you get what is referred to as rickets in children, where their legs will bow because their bones are unmineralized and too soft. Okay, so there is one essential amino acid, or it's not amino acid, but one essential lipid, and this is linoleic acid, and this is an omega-6 fatty acid. And so this is one that we actually have to have in our diet, because remember, essential nutrients cannot be made by the body. So linoleic acid is that one, and I can't remember. Let's see if I can. It is necessary for the production of prostaglandins. So prostaglandins are chemicals that are produced by lots of different cells. I might have mentioned them when we were talking about the circulatory system, because they do cause smooth muscle contraction. So they would cause the vessels in the blood vessels to constrict. And they're also actually an important component in inflammation. So they're an important part of inflammation. So we have to have that in order to produce prostaglandins, and prostaglandins are used throughout the body. We'll actually talk about their role in reproduction too. Okay, so those are the lipids. Now, the triglycerides in particular can be turned into energy. So they can be converted into energy, and then they go, I didn't talk about the citric acid cycle, but they can be, this just shows that they can be converted into energy if glucose is not present. Okay, proteins. So proteins are super important, and they are composed of what? Amino acids. What type of molecule is in the amine group of an amino acid? Is it a phosphate, sulfur, or nitrogen atom in the amine group of amino acids? Does anybody remember? Nope. It is nitrogen, right? So this has nitrogen. So containing. So when we break down proteins and amino acids, we produce a nitrogenous waste called urea. It's actually first produced into ammonia, and then ammonia is then converted into the less toxic form of urea. And we get rid of urea by urinating it out. So if we take in and we catabolize a lot of protein, so if we break down a lot of protein for energy, for example, we're going to produce more nitrogenous waste, and we're going to need to use more water to get rid of the nitrogen through urea, okay? So there are 8 essential amino acids in human adults, and you do not need to know all of them, or any of them actually. You need to know what essential means, right? And so when we talk about different sources of protein in our diet, we have what is called a complete versus incomplete protein. So complete protein has all the essential amino acids that we need to produce our proteins in our body. And so this would be animal source, right? So this would be animal meat. It would also be eggs, for example, okay? Also dairy's got lots of protein in it.
Those have all 8 essential?
They have all 8 essential amino acids. Okay. Incomplete proteins are typically from plants, except soy. Soybeans are actually a complete form of protein. So sometimes you get protein shakes and it says it's got soy in it, right? And it says it's got like 9 grams of protein. It's full of soy, okay? So that is complete protein. So that has all the amino acids that you would need to build your proteins. And the importance of that is that it is protein production is all or none. So if you do not, if you're like missing one of these 8 essential amino acids, your proteins will not get built, right? So you have to have the essential amino acids. So when we look at vegetarian diets, right, it's actually a little bit more important to make sure that you eat different types of foods together. And so when we look at vegetarians, we need to combine grains plus legumes to get complete protein. Right? So I think people kind of figured this out about the combination, because if you think about beans and rice, right, a lot of parts of the world, that is a staple in your diet. If you eat beans and rice together, then you will have a source of complete protein, just like if you were eating a steak. Okay? If you eat lentils and rice, if you eat peanut butter and bread, a peanut butter sandwich is a complete source of protein. Okay? So in your book, there is a diagram that shows where these amino acids come from in terms of, of where they are. So these are the 8 essential amino acids. It's a little bit different. Like in babies, histidine is an essential amino acid, but it's not in adults. So, so this just shows the overlap, right? So if you had corn and beans, for example, peas and corn, then you would have a complete source of amino acids. Okay. And I did look at that Quaz-York thing, and this just shows a diagram of it. So this is not due to eating too many carbohydrates, because this is not due to fat. So it's not like they have visceral fat. It's a hard belly, but it's not like the same thing as like the big belly that we see in our country, like the people that have the big hard bellies, right? And actually, it is also due to an enlarged liver, because the liver has to be used to break down protein. So the liver gets enlarged, and then you do have edema. So you have swelling of fluid buildup in the body cavity. Okay. So this just shows protein metabolism, right? So this shows that when we break down amino acids, we release ammonia, we produce ammonia, and we convert that into urea, where it has to be excreted. We also can actually become a little bit ill if we use too many proteins for energy, because it produces what are called keto acids. And so it can lead to acidosis in your blood. So it can make your blood too acidic, and that can be a life-threatening thing, too, that is associated with famine. So that is the metabolism of proteins in the liver. Okay, so we can talk about what are called trace elements in the body. And these are not used for building blocks necessarily. So they're not like amino acids and glucose and lipids. So when we talk about vitamins, vitamins have letters that has nothing to do with their function. And so the lettering is due to the order in which they were discovered. So A was discovered before B vitamins, right? And then you have B1, B2, B3, all the way to B12, right? And then you have C. So scientists actually tried to redo that, you know, and it didn't take. Okay, so give them more biologically significant names as to what they function as. So most of the time, vitamins are examples of coenzymes. So they participate in chemical reactions. And they have to be present for some chemical reactions to take place. So we know that vitamin C is an essential nutrient. Right? And it is actually used in collagen production. What type of molecule is collagen? Does anybody remember? Is collagen a protein, a lipid, a carbohydrate, or a nucleic acid? It is a protein, and it is found in the bone, right? So the collagen fibers in your bones are what kind of give it its structure, and then it's mineralized, right? So if you don't have vitamin C, your bones won't form properly, but we also have collagen in the skin, so you'll get, like, your skin will start to get lesions in it from the lack of vitamin C. And I think we mentioned that was called scurvy, if you have a lack of vitamin C. Okay, some vitamins that we talked about was one that was produced by E. coli in the gut. So does anybody remember what was the vitamin that E. coli produced? K, right? So vitamin K, E. coli in gut produces this. And so what was its function? What did it serve as? Clotting. So it actually participates in the chemical reaction that eventually will cause the blood to clot. Okay, so when we talk about minerals, right, these are actually generally not coenzymes, but they're cofactors. So what this means is that they are oftentimes involved in physiological mechanisms. So they're important factors, but it's not like an enzyme. And so a lot of these minerals are ionized. So they're in their ion form. So many are in ion form. Can you give me an example? What's a mineral that's in its ion form in our body? Sodium, right? Chloride, potassium. Oops, potassium. So these are all necessary for the proper functioning of your nervous system, because remember that it's the ions moving in and out of the neurons that cause action potentials to be generated and propagated along the length of a neuron. Okay. They can be also attached to proteins. And the good example of that is iron attached to globin. Right? And it's the iron portion we talked about that binds the oxygen. And so remember that we talked about saturation of hemoglobin. How many oxygen is bound to the iron, right? And that saturation is important because hemoglobin has to be able to pick up, but also release oxygen where it is needed. So it's got to reversibly bind with oxygen. Okay. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is metabolism. So how would we go about like measuring your metabolic rate? So we're going to talk about metabolic rate. So that would be like how much energy are you producing? And we have the basal metabolic rate. And this is the amount of energy that is needed to simply survive. So this is amount of energy, is usually measured in kilocalories, needed to survive. If you take into consideration like movements and other activities, then you're talking about the total metabolic rate. And that includes all activities. So one way that you can try to determine what a person's metabolic rate is you put them into a calorimetric chamber. So that's energy chamber. And so what this does is it tries to estimate the amount of energy that you produce as heat. So it looks at heat production, O2 use, and CO2 production. We have to take into consideration heat because as we metabolize things, one of the byproducts is heat, and so we lose heat to the environment because we are endothermic organisms. So they have constructed these little chambers, and they're actually quite interesting. So you can, oh, this isn't a very good picture of one, but this is an example of a chamber, and you could put somebody in this chamber and notice how they're trying to estimate the amount of heat that is being produced by having it warm water, right? And then we look at the amount of water. We also measure the amount of O2 used, and then they absorb the amount of CO2. So we get an estimate of that being produced. And so I wanted to just show you this little video put on a blog of a scientist who uses one of these to measure. Let's see if I can find it. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. So this is a scientist, I think she's in Copenhagen, and she's sitting in one of these specialized rooms that help to estimate metabolism.
Thanks for joining me on drsue.ca. Well, it may look to you like I'm sitting in a regular office right now, but I'm actually not. Got quite a surprise for you today. I'm actually at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, where I did a research sabbatical last year. I came back for a week, and I'm sitting inside of what's called a respiration chamber. This is a very special place where we're able to measure energy expenditure over a 24-hour period, meaning that we can by having a patient come into this chamber, which is actually more like a little apartment, and I'll show you around in just a second, we can actually measure how many calories are burned over a 24-hour period and get an excellent measurement of metabolism. And over and above that, we can actually look at, by examining the air coming into the chamber and the air leaving the chamber, as well as nitrogen excretion in the urine, we can actually determine how many of those calories were burned from carbohydrate metabolism versus protein metabolism versus fat metabolism. Let me show you around. So this is a place where our patients will stay for a 24-hour period. I hope nobody gets motion sick by moving my computer around a little bit. But here we have a nice desk where there's internet access. There's a sort of a Murphy bed that folds out here from the wall. There's a TV. And then we have the toilet facilities in the corner here, and a little sink where people can wash up. This metal contraption here is actually for taking blood tests. So patients can put their arms into a sealed chamber, and then somebody sits on the outside and takes blood work. And then we have a compartment here where food is served throughout the day. So we also do a number of interesting things like meal tests, where we look at the hormones that are released following a meal. And in the study that I spent a lot of time working on last year and that I continue working on now is actually a study looking at gastric bypass patients and how their energy expenditure changes between before and after bypass surgery compared to patients who are losing weight with a low-calorie diet. So it's very exciting stuff, and I'm sure happy to be back here for a week catching up with everybody. And I thought I'd share it with you. Have a great day, drsue.ca.
Okay, so that's an example of a calometric chamber. She called it a respiration chamber, but it's also measuring heat, so it's more of a calometric. So that is one way that we can kind of estimate metabolism. We can also look at what affects metabolism. So we could look at factors. So what kind of factors determine metabolism? So one thing has to do with age. So children have a faster metabolism, one, because they are growing, but two, it's because they're losing energy faster to their environment. And why is that? Why would like a baby be losing energy faster to their environment than an adult? They lose heat over the surface of their body, so it would be due to, does anybody guess? No? Surface area to volume, right? So if you have children or babies, right, they have a greater surface area to volume ratio, right, a ratio than adults, right? So they're going to have a higher metabolic rate because they're losing heat to their environment. That's specifically important for babies, right? Because they can lose heat really rapidly. But we'll talk about something else that babies have in a minute. Okay, and older adults tend to have a lower metabolism. So as you get older, you don't get to eat all the things you get to eat when you're younger. So you have to like really scale back on the amount of calories. And one reason they believe this is to be true is that as you age, you lose muscle mass. So the loss of muscle mass. So this is why that they always recommended if you want to lose weight, then you want to build your muscles, because that will help to increase your metabolism so that you're burning more calories, right? So weightlifting is a good way to do this, or even yoga, isometric exercises, right? You can gain muscle mass, and so therefore your metabolic rate will go up and you'll burn more fat, but you'll have more muscle tone. Okay. We also have the same thing with gender, is that males tend to have more muscle. Right? They also tend to have less subcutaneous fat. Right? So they tend to lose heat more readily to their environment if they have less subcutaneous fat, and they tend to need more energy because they have more muscle. Another factor is hormones. So what is the major hormone that regulates metabolism in the body? What is the gland that regulates your metabolism? Not the adrenal gland. That actually stress can cause adrenaline. But what is it's right up in here? Thyroid, right? So the thyroid gland. Yeah. So this produces thyroxine. And almost all cells will respond to thyroxine by increasing their metabolic rate. And so when you gain weight rapidly or lose weight rapidly, they take a blood test and they look at your thyroid hormones, right? Because if you have hyperthyroidism, or if you have a hyperthyroid, right, that means that you're going to have a very high metabolic rate and you're going to lose weight. And you might think that that's a good thing, but if you get so skinny and no matter how much you eat, you still feel so skinny and you're hot and you're sweaty and you just don't feel good, you know, you could have the hyperthyroid, okay? If you gain a lot of weight over a short period of time, they might look and they might check to see if you have hypothyroid. So this decreases metabolic rate and you gain weight.
So what is it called when you fluctuate?
Thermoregulation. No, oh, would you fluctuate between those two?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like my thyroid, they say like it's I gain a lot of weight or I'll lose a lot of weight. Like I have something, I don't know.
It just isn't, I don't know what that is either.
Yeah.
What's the word for it? Graves' disease is hyperthyroid. Yep. Addison's disease, I think, is the opposite. That's hypothyroid. The thyroid hormone is thyroxine, and the thyroid hormone, other thyroid hormone, are also really important in children. It's more dangerous to have a fluctuation in thyroid in children because it affects the metabolism of the nerve cells, and so it can affect mental development.
So they use thyroxine like with like that?
You know, I don't think you want to mess with your, I don't think they let you mess with your thyroid hormones. Yeah. I think they're too sensitive to, I don't think you can mess with them. Okay.
It's probably a good way to get a bunch of money as a hospital, though. Just give people all this stuff to lose weight.
Okay. Another interesting thing is brown fats. So most of our fat is adipose, white tissue. It's white adipose, but brown fat is metabolically active fat. So it causes what is referred to as non-shivering thermogenesis. So if we think about this, temperature generation that doesn't involve shivering. So we can regulate, if we shiver, if we're cold, we'll shiver, and that actually helps to raise our body temperature, right? We're making our muscle cells use ATP, and that generates heat. But brown fat is non-shivering, and it's very important in infants. So this is why when babies that are born get like left in bathrooms or in other places, they don't die because they are able to regulate their body temperature. They're able to actually stay warm because they have the presence of the brown fat. Now it's believed that as we develop and as we turn into children and then to adults, the brown fat starts to decrease. But there's a new hypothesis that you can actually increase the amount of brown fat that you have by changing your environment. So a few years ago, it was like, okay, so if you keep your house at a cooler temperature, so if you keep your house at 70 degrees, you're gonna never be really cold, right? And you're gonna not have a lot of brown fat. But the idea is that you turn down the thermostat and you let yourself be in a cooler environment, that you'll actually develop more brown fat, and then you'll have a higher metabolic rate. So there's some evidence that that is true. Okay? So brown fat is a really interesting area that they're looking at in terms of looking at that. Okay, let me find my notes here.
Me too. Yeah. I'd rather have a sweatshirt on in my house than be like, oh my God, I'm gonna
Okay, so let's see, gender, hormones, I have to think about this because I lost my notes here. What are other factors? Okay, let me just skip through these.
It's like a month, because next month is gonna be cold. Yes.
Okay. So the last thing that we're going to talk about is how we regulate our body weight. And so it's very interesting because if you think about it, you kind of want your body weight to be relatively stable. So you don't want to like gain a lot of weight and lose a lot of weight over a given amount of time. So it's like homeostasis, right? If you think about it, you want your body weight to stay relatively stable over time. What happens, however, is that as we age, it tends to creep up. And so people will gain weight and then they'll be at maybe an unhealthy weight for a long period of time. And so the question is, what maintains our body weight? And this is what is referred to as the set point hypothesis. Okay. So this is the idea that we get to a set point, and then our body tries to maintain that set point by adjusting our metabolic rate. So let's say if I was 170 pounds, that might be really heavy for me, but no matter what I ate, if I ate a little extra, or if I like went on a diet and I tried to eat a little less, my body would try to maintain that 170 pounds no matter what, because that is my homeostatic balance, right? So that's my set point. And so this is the idea that, say, for example, a 170-pound person and a 115-pound person can eat the same number of calories and maintain their weight, if that is their set point. So it's not necessarily that a person that's 170 pounds is eating a lot of food to maintain the 170 pounds. And we kind of all know this intuitively, that you get to a weight and you just kind of stay there. And you're like, you might be frustrated because you're trying to lose weight, right? But you kind of just stay there. And so this is due to a hormone that was just discovered in the 1990s, and it is a hormone called leptin. And this is long-term regulation of weight, and it is a hormone. And it is produced by fat tissue. So maybe the reason why we didn't discover it was that we didn't think fat tissue was endocrine, right? So this is an endocrine function of fat. And you're like, I didn't think that the fat was an endocrine tissue. So that's an endocrine function. And since they've discovered this, they've been looking in other types of tissues. Like now they've discovered that there's actually a hormone produced by bone. And you think that, oh, the bone shouldn't be producing hormones because it's not an endocrine gland. But we're finding that there's more hormones being produced by different types of tissues. Okay. So let's say that we feast, right? And fat is stored.
Is there a way to get rid of that hormone?
No, there's no way to get rid of it. You don't really want to get rid of it entirely, because if you ever had to go through a period of time where you didn't have food, like you wouldn't want to lose a lot of weight really fast. Like if you didn't have access to food.
Yeah, I just figured like if there was like a way to like slow it down or something, it would be like a really great way to make it controlling.
Leptin is actually the good. Actually, the lack of leptin is the bad. It's a lack of leptin. So I guess you could take in more leptin. If you could get your body to produce more leptin, it's actually good.
So you have to have more fat to produce more leptin?
Yes. Yep. So the fat is stored, right? And it produces leptin. And leptin goes to your hypothalamus and the other parts of your body, and it causes an increase in metabolism. Right? And it could be long-term, but actually you probably have all experienced this. Thanksgiving is the worst thing. I always hated going home for Thanksgiving. Because my mom would always keep the house at like 70 degrees with all the windows and doors shut, right? And you eat this large meal, and then all of a sudden you'd start to feel hot. Like I feel so hot, right? And I'm like, bye, see ya, I'm going for a walk. Right? Because I'm so hot, right? And so after you eat, your metabolism increases, right? Because you want to burn off some of that energy. You don't want to get it all stored as fat because we want to maintain our set point of weight, right? So we increase our metabolism and more energy is used, okay? So then let's look at famine when we stop eating. So this could even be like, I decide that I'm just going to lose weight by not eating, right? So what happens is fat is used. That's a good thing because I want to lose some fat, right? But then producing, our leptin is not produced.
So then when you eat, your body like packs it on basically?
Yes.
Yeah, you shock your body.
Okay. So then you decrease your metabolism. So this is why it is true that some people that weigh 200 pounds and are way overweight, right? They might hardly eat anything, right? They could maintain that. Because if they're eating a low amount and their set point is 200, then they could literally maintain that set point.
How long like would that famine have to be like? Would it be like not eating one day and then eating, or would it be like not eating a couple days?
It's more like crash fad dieting. Like, oh, I'm only going to eat cantaloupe, right? Or I'm only going to eat watermelon.
Or I always wondered this. So my dad would, go to work at like 6 in the morning, come home at 5. Never packed a lunch, would never take a lunch, would only eat dinner. Wouldn't eat breakfast, would just drink coffee all day. And I'm like, how do you not ever lose weight? And of course he would gain a little weight because he's, in his late 40s.
That's because his metabolism got really efficient.
And it's because kind of now that you're saying that, it makes sense because when every day for a number of years, you only eat one meal a day, well, your body's constantly starving itself. It gets that one meal and it's like, okay, I'm good till tomorrow this time. So it totally makes sense how people do that. And I mean, being a girl, I'm sure we've all done it. We're like, well, I'm not going to eat till dinner then today. Like, I don't have the time, or I don't.
It's actually best to eat your biggest meal at lunch because that way you're not storing energy overnight. Yeah, so you're not supposed to eat after, 5 or something like that.
If you want to lose weight, don't eat after 2 p.m.
The way to really lose weight is to have a healthy diet and to eat like pretty balanced meals every day.
Yes, so you don't want to just stop eating because what you're going to do is you might lose a little weight, but then your metabolism will become super efficient. And then when you start eating normally again, then your metabolism takes a while to catch back up. And so you might actually exceed, even if you drop below your set point, you might actually exceed the set point before coming back down.
Well, and when you eat healthy too, isn't it like if you were to eat like celery and carrots and fruit for breakfast and then a nice a decent sized sandwich, like your body, don't you burn so many calories by your body trying to break that down because it's healthier instead of just absorbing like a McDouble? Isn't it kind of, your body doesn't have to work as hard to digest.
Your body doesn't have to work, and your liver doesn't have. Your liver has to deal with all that fat.
So that's another, like, are you losing weight by doing, not like diet purposes, but like for this type of thing, is it eating healthier is going to help maintain that stuff?
So they actually discovered this using mice that were genetically identical to each other except for lacking the leptin gene. So if they didn't have the leptin gene, and I have to go ahead, oops, there it is. If they didn't have, so these are like genetically identical except for one gene. They're also fed the exact same food, right? So this one's not getting more food. He's not eating more. It's not that he's eating more. He's getting the exact same amount of food, right? And so that's what leptin does. It helps to regulate the long-term regulation of body weight. Yeah, so you want leptin. Yeah.
Load me up.
So there have been diets where people have tried to increase their leptin levels I don't think you can just take it, eating it, because I think you would digest it. So I think that, maybe you could do an experiment where you would inject leptin into your circulatory system. Yeah, but that would be a doctor thing that you'd have to do probably. Although they do HCG, where they inject you with hormones that make you feel like you don't want to eat. But okay, so that's the long-term regulation. Okay, so does anybody have their review sheet? I just want to make sure that I've covered everything on that review sheet. Okay, so we talked about micro, macro, essential. That would be like, micro would be like vitamins too, and nutrients. Okay, we did not cover oxidation reduction. We did not cover NAD and FAD, and then I decided not to cover glycolysis. Because why?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so cross off oxidation, reduction, FAD, NAD, glycolysis, citric acid. Or we didn't talk about neural regulation, so we just talked about leptin. So just hormones, so that would just be leptin.
So erase the neural regulation?
Yeah, that's hypothalamus. Hypothalamus controls hunger and whether or not you feel satiated.
So just erase neural, not hormonal?
Yeah, because leptin, you put leptin in parentheses there.
Am I erasing oxidative?
Yes, you are.
So just 3 things? 3 things plus oxidation, reduction, and then
So I wrote this review sheet before I actually wrote my lecture. Okay, so I will see you in lab for your dissection.
So when do you want us to turn in our,
Oh, that's a good idea. So you'll turn in your lab notebook with your midterm. No. Yeah,
did you do that last year where you arranged?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yes, I graded your lab notebook. That was a good idea.
While we were taking
I have to be really efficient because I have way overload this quarter.
Last Friday, you said?
Lab on Friday, yep.
Hey, buddy. I'm tired today.
a little bit.
Are you getting a cold? I heard you sniffling back there. Oh,
Well,
no.
I actually got.
I know November, we don't have like 10
Yeah.
days.
Oh.
But it's like a, I feel like it's just a 24 hour.
Yeah, just kind of like the I'm so tired.
Yeah.